computer. Awesome. Just give me 1 second. I have some of my little notes. All right. And then as I said, I'll do a little thing, and then we'll just, as I said, have a conversation. So, hey everyone, my name is Jason Wendroff Rodnicki. I'm a body-centered grief therapist, and what I love is I love to have open conversations about grief and loss because we don't talk about it enough in our society and to tell the realities of the situation. And I'm going to be speaking in September at the Grief Awareness and Education Conference in Hartford, Connecticut on September 20th, which it's 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And the Grief Awareness and Education Conference aims to provide meaningful insights and strategies to navigate grief, loss, and bereavement within the context of personal and organizational change. Through inspiring presentations where we're going to have conversations with, I'm going to be doing conversations with each of our speakers. There are going to be actionable takeaways where we seek to foster a deep understanding of the universal experiences and empower attendees to embrace change with resilience and empathy. And the theme of the conference is embracing change. Dr. Karen Kramer, who I'm going to be talking to in a moment, known as Dr. Karen, is globally recognized as in grief recovery and resilience navigator, who has empowered hundreds and thousands to overcome trauma and loss with strength and purpose. With a PhD in human and organizational development and certifications in modalities like NLP, hypnotherapy, and neuroplasticity, she blends science and soul to deliver a transformative healing through her signature healthy grief framework. Her work has impacted clients from all walks of life, including global organizations like Google, Nike, and the CIA, and inspired her best-selling book, Healthy Grief. As founder of Villa Vision Wellness and Retreat Center, Karen offers immersive retreats and private sessions to help others reconnect with their purpose. And all of that stuff is absolutely amazing, Karen. I just reading it is brings a light to my even soul. So welcome. I'm so glad that we're able to talk today about the theme of our conference, embracing change, right? So what does embracing change mean to you?
I love it, Jason, and thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here and chatting with you again. So you mentioned something even right from the get-go about it really looking at the fact that we live in a grief avoidance society. We don't have enough conversations like we are doing, which is why this conference is so powerful to get us to engage in those things that we might otherwise avoid.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more information, even if you look at YouTube, podcasts, books, self help books. There's a lot more information about winning, succeeding, and acquiring, but there's less information about how to lose, let go, and grieve. So, as part of this embracing change, when we have something in our life, whether it is a grief, a loss, a challenge, a setback, when life does not go as planned. And then it is a matter of us either sitting there complaining about the fact that life is just not the way we want it to be or used to be, or we embrace what is
Yeah.
when what once was is no longer, which is what I talk about in my book, thinking about my definition of grief. It's almost like we're reading a book and we come to the end of the chapter and something happens, right? Something happened in that chapter that leads to the next one. Usually it's like that cliffhanger if we're talking about the Hollywood, right?
Yep.
But it's something that happens. But for us going through life, if we have a setback, a challenge, a grief situation, a trauma, what once was, even if it is a hope and dream, is no longer. How do we flip into that next chapter of our life by embracing what is versus getting stuck in the past of what once was?
Yeah, and I feel really that's where all the pain lies, right? Like we're always mourning, like we're always trying to live in the past with, oh, if this person were in my life, like, but the reality is, if you're really present, they've changed, they've transformed into a different different entity, however, like I don't want to get too woo-woo about it, but right, they've transitioned into a different space. And how can we be present with that as that is and not hide all of the maybe negative emotions that we're feeling, the negative actions that we're doing, all of these things. We have to really embrace that part of ourselves too, because there is no light without that darkness. And so we need to embrace both at the same time. And it can be challenging for sure. For sure.
Yes. And you talked about it, Jason, even if it is, and by the way, I come from a background of being born with an engineer father and a clairvoyant psychic mother. So I can talk science and woo-woo in the same sentence. So that's okay. When it comes to grief, like what you're talking about is there's a loss. If I have a loss, which by the way, let's set the context. Usually it's a loss of a loved one due to death or dying, but it could be a relationship, the death of a relationship as we once know it. It
Yep.
also could be the loss of a career or changing a career, an empty nester, a retiree, anything that challenges and shifts the way of how we think of our identity and
Mhm.
association to something or someone. So let's set the context there about, yes, we're focusing on death and dying, but really, when I talk about embracing change, I look at grief as more than death and dying.
Yep.
It's an everyday loss. And when we can look at those everyday losses and start to build our resiliency muscle, then when we are faced with the bigger losses in our life, we can go back to that muscle, right? That's built up, that teaches us how to go through the mini losses in our life to prepare us for the bigger ones. So back to what you were just saying then, Jason, let's imagine I'm sitting here and I just had some sort of loss, something that shakes me up. So you're talking about the emotional body, right? There's a lot of emotions that are going on that are flooding there. There's a lot of thoughts that I have there. Those emotions and those thoughts are based upon how I choose to see the world,
Yep.
because the world really has no meaning other than what we base on it, right? So emotional, our thoughts, it affects our body, and also we can talk about the spiritual, whatever that means for us, but just thinking and feeling what is going on, because if we're not approaching and healthfully going through what we're thinking and feeling, it will definitely affect the body.
Yeah.
Hence the reason why I wrote Healthy Grief.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that, and this is sort of where this is like my zone of genius is where if we get our body healthy, it can go up too, right? Like, so when we're eating well, when we're sleeping well, when we're really taking care of ourselves physically, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with the emotional and mental stressors of grief because you're in a place where you're more vibrant and you're more vital. And because if you're coming at it from an energetically depleted state, then anything that happens is gonna set you off even more. So if you can do those things, and I'm a big fan of rituals and like let's put ourselves in a peak state or in a vibrant state first. And then if grief sneaks its head up, you're at least going to be in a better place to deal with it rather than if you're completely exhausted, haven't slept in, 24 hours, you're completely de-energized. So it can go in both directions. And I think it's really important to make sure that we're dealing with all of it, not just part of it.
Yes. And those are some of the things I work with when I'm working with my corporate clients, is that building that resilience, like you're talking about physical, mental, emotional, social resilience. It's there. And I even use the rubber band analogy, the idea that we have like, hey, we're late to work. We got the project that's landed. Hey, the refrigerator broke. Whatever it is, the stressors in our life. But if we build up that rubber band of resilience, to your point, that we are eating well, that we are sleeping well, we are having a regular routine, whether that's exercise, whether that's meditating, whatever it is for us. So we build up that resilience. We're not going to snap, right? We can bounce back quicker if we have built up that resilience. So I agree. There's twofold. One is building it up so we are healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever that means for us. So when grief hits, we
Yep.
have that built that resiliency muscle. And also when we are do have some form of grief that affects us, we are able to healthfully process through it, because over a period of time, if we have not resolved or at least process through that grief. So hear me when it says process through, we're not always stuck in the past.
Yep.
If we are stuck in the past, and I'm talking like 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, and we're constantly going back to the way once was, then we will end up, it will settle in the body.
Yep.
Everything from minor aches and pains to major things like heart diseases and heart attacks, which, by the way, are the top two leading causes of death here, at least within the United States, the previous 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and something interesting that I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, but sometimes when people come up at, when those physical manifestations show up, sometimes it mirrors the actual, if it's in those physical death losses, sometimes it mirrors the whatever the other person was going through. So I have a client that was having some respiratory issues, and it turns out that her sister died of respiratory disease, and someone had lower back issues. Her mom had had some lower back issues before she passed, and so sometimes those physical manifestations mirror are the person that we lost. I don't know if you've experienced that as well. You're shaking your head, so I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's that gets into, in my way, it gets into the spiritual body.
Yes.
So it's how empathetic, like so when I was 14, my godfather passed away due to a heart attack. At the time that he had the heart attack, did not know it. I was having chest pains.
Mm,
So yes, those are some, picking up from that energetic perspective where we're really close to somebody. We may be picking up on certain things like, hey, I'm just having a sense that so and so, that I really need to call so and so that I haven't talked to you for a while. So, really paying attention to the energy that's around us,
yeah.
that intuition, let's put it that way, that intuition that's telling us that something may be wrong with somebody, or we should reach out, or paying attention to our own body. So, when I say spiritual, it's just more that intuition, paying attention to the intuition, that we can be very in sync with those around us as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as you're saying this, I remember the last phone call I had with my sister before she passed, and I was on the phone with her, and I knew something was wrong. Like, and she died in a car accident, so she didn't. But there was something different in her voice that I couldn't put at the time. And I know they say sometimes, like before people pass, there's an intuition that they know that it's going to happen. And so when I talked to her, I'm like, I'm gonna come over and see you because we were supposed to get together. And she's like, don't come, don't come. I'm like, but why? She wouldn't give me a reason. And there was just something different in her voice. And, looking back at it later, I'm thinking, oh, maybe she had like that intuition that she wasn't going to be around and didn't want the pain of, getting together and that kind of stuff. So I do believe that 100% that it could, things like that are in play.
They are in play. And again, that gets into that spiritual context that we're talking about, paying attention to our intuition. I've had some of my clients who are going through survivor's guilt. It's
Yes.
that survivor's guilt from, and let me set the context first before I go forward. Survivor's guilt is typically are those who have lost someone, and either I wish it was me, or I'm alive, they're not. However, tie it into what you just shared, Jason, is hey, I had an intuition that I should have seen or called or been with. I didn't follow that intuition, and
Hmm.
now I don't have the opportunity to. I didn't have the opportunity to respond to that text message, that call, etc. So, all of that to say, if you get that intuition, follow it, because there's something more that's there, and not necessarily saying just leading to the passing of a loved one. It's just the more we pay attention, I'm going to say this in and of itself, box in and of itself. When our intuition talks, listen to it. Put it there.
100%. And actually that was one of the lessons that I've learned out of my sister's passing. about not waiting to tell people the things that you need to tell them, because you don't know if it's you don't know how much time you have to tell. You think, oh, I've got all the time in the world, but the reality is we don't know. And when you think about it, when you think of somebody, let them know. Just let them know. And I think that's something that I've tried to live by, not to hold my emotions back. Even if I'm angry at somebody, I'll be like, you know what? You did this thing and it really upset me. Let's work through this so that I don't have to carry this anger about you, because you don't know if you'll ever have the opportunity to resolve it. And yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that I just mentioned my godfather here just a moment ago, the one who passed when due to a heart attack when I was 14. His daughter, he had had an argument with his daughter. He had a heart attack, passed away, and his daughter carried the guilt
Mm.
of not being able to resolve that. Now, I know from talking woo woo just a bit, because again, that's in the world that I am as a hypnotherapist, is both from the one who is living. Let's just use this example of my godfather and his daughter. Both for his daughter who was living, there was a lot of unresolved. I can't have that conversation with my, I can't, right, face to face.
Right.
Can't have that conversation in the work that I do. It's also the one who passed. Also, there's an energetic
Mhm.
uneasiness that's there. Yes, there is a way. And again, we kind of get into that spiritual perspective as a hypnotherapist. That's also some things I do to help both the one who's living as well as the one who's passed on also have some energetic conversations to be able to release that energy.
Yeah, I actually used to do that with myself all the time. I would sit and I would sit in meditation, and I would imagine like sitting in a park on a park bench with my sister, and we just literally talk. And it was a practice that I did, I would say probably maybe not every day, but definitely on a weekly basis, where I would imagine us having this conversation. And it didn't matter. It was all in my own mind. It wasn't in, I mean, she was gone, and I wasn't kidding myself but those conversations were really important to me. And it was more for me than for her. But I'm sure it was for her a little bit too. But having that, being able to like process all of the feelings and have the conversations that I couldn't have had with her in person was tremendously helpful. And I think they're finding, I think I saw a research not too long ago that they're actually showing scientifically that those conversations are very, very healing on a physiological level.
There are, and I unfortunately don't remember the name of it, but there's something that popped up recently, and I believe it's a documentary about connecting ways to, again, process through, just like you're talking about, having those conversations with our loved ones, anything that's left unsaid, because energetically, and again, I know from my work, getting sort of woo-woo here, but from my work, it helps both sides energetically. And again, just thinking for ourselves on just the able body side of it, if you want to call it that, how healing it is to be able to release whatever it is that is left unsaid. Automatic writing is another great tool to use.
Yeah.
So even if you think just, hey, I'm writing a letter to my loved one who passed, again, you can also use it for, say, relationships or anybody who is currently alive. But again, let's stick with the concept of somebody who may have passed. Do an automatic writing, or just write a letter to the one who has passed. That's another way of processing information out. Automatic writing, just because I use that term, just means you're also tapping into your intuition.
Yes.
So when you're doing the writing, you may also hear the other person who has passed start to respond. So when I'm using automatic writing, that's just another way of tapping into your intuition and the energy around you. And you may actually hear their message come through. Just to set the context of what I mean by that automatic writing. I've also done one of the meditations that I do on a monthly basis for individuals. I also call to the stage. I create a little stage on their hand, and I say, call to their stage. Anybody that you have, any person alive or is no longer alive, in which you have in energy. between you and that person that's out of balance, out of harmony, or something left unsaid.
Mm.
And even during that process is another way in which individuals even say, so bring your stage up in front of you for 30 seconds. What do you want to say to that person? Just another way, like you sitting on the park bench metaphorically with your sister,
Yeah.
various different ways that you can process through that information. Because again, if we're holding on to it, especially if there's something left unsaid with somebody who has passed, it is negatively affecting us. That's not helping us with our healthy grieving process.
Well, right, and it needs expression, right? Because it's either going to be expressed in a very creative way, like finding your stage or automatic writing, right? That's a constructive way of taking all of that, or it's going to go inward and it can be very destructive. Like I know a lot of grieving people turn to drugs and alcohol and addiction and that kind of stuff. So, it can be a very slippery slope if you don't find those creative ways of expressing what has been left unsaid.
Good. And thank you for also talking about the ways of numbing out. That's
Yeah.
another way is those who are stuck in the past and or are trying not to get stuck in the past, so they just want to numb themselves out. And that's where some of the addictions come in, which by the way, it's not just drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex. It can also be overworking,
Yeah. Oh,
overeating. There's other ways in which we may numb ourselves out and not even realize it. So actually, with this, Jason, I'd love to look at the flip side of it, which people usually ask. So, how do I know when I have healthfully grieved? And here are some signs that might indicate that you have healthfully grieved. One is really thinking about the fact that you're no longer stuck in the past or you're no longer numbing yourself out, because we just talked about those examples right here. So you really can be present in the moment and start focusing on the future. So, what does that look like? Love social media because it's a great way to test whether you have truly grieved or not. So, for example, if you have, for somebody who has gone through a miscarriage, if you see somebody who is pregnant or just had a baby and can authentically congratulate them, that means that you're in the healthy grieving process. If you've gone through a divorce or the breakup, and you see somebody getting engaged or just getting married or celebrating an anniversary and can authentically, wholeheartedly congratulate them, again, you're on the healthy process. Again, if there's a passing of a loved one and you see somebody who has also had somebody who has passed, that you can send your sympathy wholeheartedly focusing on them and their grief and not wanting to jump on the, yeah, me, here's what I'm going through and all of this, and start bringing you back to your own grief. So those are just three examples to think about, just social media, maybe conversations. Again, if you hear anything that triggers you into the past, that used to trigger you in the past, but recognize that you can stay still present with the person who's in front of you and congratulate them or be with them in their own grief and focus on the future versus getting caught up in the past. And also, we're human, right?
oh,
If we, it doesn't mean that we're never going to emote about a loss. It doesn't mean, Jason, that you're never going to think about the loss of your sister, right?
right.
It's one of the individuals. I have 30 grief survivor case studies in healthy grief, and one of them is a woman who unfortunately lost her teen daughter to suicide, so death by suicide in this case. And it's one of the things she said to me is that I'm always going to think about that loss. It's not that it's, I'm not I'm moving forward. I'm not moving on, which is critical. She's not moving on like leaving her daughter behind, because her daughter was very important to her. But what she said is that her life grows bigger around that loss.
Yeah.
Her life grows bigger around that loss. And then it's not every day that she wakes up in the morning and thinks about the loss. It's not the first thing she thinks about. And maybe she does have some days where she goes by and she's not thinking about that loss. So again, leaving people with the idea of what does it look like to healthfully grieve and get to the other side.
Well, I love that analogy that like our grief stays the same size and we just grow and get bigger so that it takes up like less space within us. I mean, that's just a beautiful way of, I just love that idea, you know. And it's like,
Yeah.
what was I going to say? Yeah, it's, I could automatically think, like what you were saying about, I can think of the time when I found out about my sister's death. Like that image is, there's a couple of images that are burned like into my memory. But I could be there, right? But it doesn't have the emotional charge that it once did. And it doesn't derail me for like 3 or 4 days like it used to. Like I can think, all right, wow, when I'm telling my story or when I'm, you know, sharing with someone, most people remember though a couple of very key moments, and but they don't, as I say, I can visualize them, I can go back there in my head, but I don't let it, you know, derail me like I used to. So that, I think that's exactly kind of what you're talking about, as not forgetting and moving forward with the grief. Like I like to look at it as like kind of like my friend that comes along with me, right? Like, you know, and you have to learn, everyone's different, everybody's grief story is different. And so you have to learn to work with your own particular story. And I think that's why it's so important to have, you know, work privately or in small group settings, so that this way you can really get into how you function with your grief, not how people in general, or, you know, there's a guy that's part of the sibling community, and we have a very similar scenario. He lost his brother in a car accident. I lost my sister. I went to go see the car where the in the junkyard after she passed, and he went to go see the junkyard of his, you know, with his of his brother's car. For me, it gave me such deep sense of peace because I knew she wasn't going to walk out of that car accident. For my friend, though, it haunts him. He wishes he hadn't done it. So everyone is so different in that way.
And it goes back to something I mentioned earlier, Jason, around the world. All of our experiences are basically how we perceive them is based upon the meaning that we placed on them. Just
Yes.
like your friend, similar situation, right? Loss of a sibling, go to see it. How you choose to process through it, how he chose to process through it, has much more than what's inside each of you.
Oh, for
Okay?
sure.
Past traumas, triggers, limiting beliefs, whatever those are inside of you, to be able to process through either healthfully or be further triggered by it. And it's something you mentioned earlier around that you remember that day when you heard, right? So we can all go back to certain events, which could be, and again, if there's a death of a loved one, when we heard that or saw that or heard the diagnosis or got the divorce papers or whatever it is pertaining to the specific divorce, when we know we've healthfully grieved, when between us and that grief moment, that moment that's there, there's no longer a lot of energetic charge. I can think back to that moment without, as you said, being emotionally dropped back to it, and it would draw you down into some emotional spiral for hours and days and months at a time, whatever it is. That energetic exchange between you as an individual and that moment, you're no longer emotionally hooked.
Yeah, no,
You have
100%.
choice.
Yeah, choice is big for me. Like, you know, like, you know, you
Mhm.
could be sad. There's nothing wrong with being sad as long as, you know, it's a choice that you're making. And people don't necessarily see that as a choice. Sometimes the choice is, you know, they feel like it's imposed upon them. And it's really important to make sure that, you know, you notice that you're sad, take a moment, embrace the sadness. And then if you want to change it, totally fine, right? But you have to take a moment with it and acknowledge it, and realize that that's your reality right now, and
Right.
you can't outthink that, or you can't out, you know, out move that. You have to accept it and then make the choice. Okay, I'm good with this now, let's choose something different, you know.
Yes. And even in that choice perspective, It's so interesting. As I'm working with my clients, I say it's all about being able to make choice. And then they say, well, yeah, I can make choices, this or that. But the process is when, if I can go back to that moment, for example, I had my oldest brother and my mother passed away 2 weeks apart. So I can go back to that moment, say when my mom passed away, and realize, okay, I've just lost two significant members in my family. So if I go back to that moment, I can think back to that moment. I now have choices, right? So I can emote about it as I think about it, or I know emotionally I have a choice. But back in that time that that happened, I didn't sense that I had a choice because in that moment, I was emotionally tied to the loss of my mother 2 weeks after my brother. So now I can step back and say I have a choice. But when we're stuck in that grief, when we're deep in the grief, we truly don't feel like we have a choice. And
Right.
so to say to somebody, it's a matter of choice. What do you mean it's a matter of choice? I just lost an important member in my family. You're like, it's da, 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 da. It's we're not recognizing it because we're stuck in that pit of grief, not realizing there's another way to think about it because we're so stuck in the pit. So part of this process is, what do we need to do to raise us out of the pit, to even recognize that there are other opportunities there that we didn't see before,
Yeah.
that then give us choice.
And that's why I think it's so important to make sure you get support right away. Like some people, oh, I'm not ready. I'm like, you know, no, you are ready. Like if you woke up in the morning and your feet are on the floor, you're ready, right? Because the longer we take to get that help and that support, the we get into habits. We get into and sometimes not so great habits that are harder to unlearn and change. So I'm a big fan of like, maybe a few weeks out, a month out, like get support as quickly as possible so that this way I know people love to say, oh, grief doesn't have a timeline, but it has an internal timeline and you better get to, the quicker you deal with it, the quicker you can learn to manage it. So
Yeah. And in healthy grief, I say, when you think you need support, you've waited too long.
yeah, exactly.
That's a better thinking of it. In fact, I have the 5 stages to healthy grieving, and one of them is specifically around support. What support do I need today? And support doesn't necessarily mean like, hey, I need to go see a therapist. Like, support can mean like, what do I need today to do laundry, to
Right.
go grocery shopping for me, to take the kids to school or help them with their homework. Or as one of the gentlemen who was I interviewed for my book said, I need somebody to buy me toilet paper and mow my lawn. I had another friend of mine who said, I need somebody to come over and just do my dishes. Like, support can be so many different things. So if
Right.
you think support and you're like, well, I'm not ready for therapy, I'm not ready for this or that, think about it just from the informal perspective of what is going to help you in this moment today to make your life easier so you can healthfully process through grief. It's like putting you back in that womb, that cocoon, to just truly support you where you are right now. So you're not having to think about paying the bills, taking the kids here, the food, all that other stuff, the toilet paper, mowing the lawn, whatever it is. Find whatever informal support as well as the professional support you need around you. So think of support in many different ways.
So, and I'm going to bring this back to the conference, right? Because the conference is a great way of finding support, right? There's going to be tons of people there that are going through that experience, and you're going to be running a panel, right, for the conference. And like, what is your idea for the panel? And I know it's still in its formulation stages, but what are some of your ideas right now?
Yes. Well, I'm excited to be part of the conference. So, Kate had asked me last year, and it was right before, so I couldn't take part in it then. So, having been a facilitator in leadership development over 30 years, I'm bringing my facilitation skills. So, it's really helping you when you join the conference to be able to pull out those golden nuggets from everything that you are learning from Jace's presentation to all the wonderful speakers who are there. So by the time you walk away from the conference, you've not only gathered your nuggets and are starting to put them into action, you're hearing about some other people who may be hearing from other breakout rooms that you didn't attend,
Yeah.
and you're taking those in, as well as walking away. And Jason, you mentioned it, walking away with other individuals that might become lifelong friends for you.
Yeah. And I think actionable steps for me, like knowledge is only potential power, right? There's so much stuff. Oh, you can go on Grief and you can YouTube it and get all of this great information. But it's until you start taking action, until you start implementing those things in your own life, in your own business, right? Because it's not just about the personal grief journey, but it's also, more, talking about system. We're going to be talking about systems in the conference and organizations. So how can you bring that into your personal life, the systems in your life, and also different organizations? And I think it's absolutely critical to be able to do all three.
Yes, definitely. And I'm so excited for seeing you at the
I
conference.
know Kate has been trying to get us together in the same room for many, many, many moons. So, just the couple of times that we've spoken, we're so on the same page. So I can't wait to actually meet you in person and, not just give you a virtual hug, but give you like an in-person consensual hug.
Yes, I love
Uh,
that energetic hug. And to those of you who are watching too, we look forward to seeing you at the conference. And more hugs. I'm a hugger, so
I'm a
consensual
big
hugs.
hugger too. Yeah, for sure. So
Me
thank
too,
you.
hug a hug.
Thank you so much for having this conversation and really just being part of this conference. It's absolutely a blessing, not just for me and Kate, but for anybody that attends. It's going to be phenomenal. So thank you
It
very
definitely
much.
will be.
And we'll see
Okay,
you in September.
wonderful. Thank you, Jason.
Oh, let me turn off the